Well, a good Friday morning to everyone out there in Dattitude land as the Saints prepare to take on the Cincinnati Bengals this Sunday in the Caesars Superdome. It is our live Friday morning visit with Jeff Duncan here on Dattitude, episode number 103, by the way. Dunk, what's going on this morning?
Not much, man. It's awesome weather. It's hard to stay cooped up inside right now. October is the best month, I think.
No doubt.
For us. Don't you agree? Like in weather-wise. So I want to try and get out, get my work done and get out and enjoy it today.
There's no question about it. And it's actually, I know you're going to be in Arizona and you're going to have a culture shock. You're going to go to the desert next week in Arizona. We're going to have an early week. It's going to be a crazy week, which is good in a way because we get out of our routine, which I'm all for this time of year. If we can get out of a routine even for a week, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And so you're going to go out to the desert. It'll probably be in the 90s out there. And then when you come back, it's supposed to be cold next week, like really cold.
Cold? Wait, what's cold mean?
Like high, like 63, and on the North Shore, they're talking about potential 30s.
Well, it was pretty damn cold over in London. I can tell you that. We were in the 50s. Wow. We were in the 50s over there for a lot of the week. So that's kind of the perfect weather in a lot of ways where you can wear kind of this, quarter zip or sweatshirt. That's perfect.
You feel like you're in the press box of the dome where it's like 51 degrees up there. Sarah Rent says she's watching from lovely Laurel, Mississippi. My nephew is actually living out there, going to college in Laurel,
Mississippi,
playing baseball out there.
When I think of Laurel, JD, I think of former Louisville Cardinal great Kenny Payne, who is now the head coach of the basketball team. He's a Laurel, Mississippi native.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Shout out. Mark Satanovich says, thank you, brother JD. A little shout out. If you want to comment or you want to be a part of Dattitude, you can comment, say hello, ask a question of Dunk. You can even ask a question of me if you want. We started off again on our Thursday picks. Dunk, for the second straight week, we got the winner right. We got the spread right. We got the total right. We were right out. In fact, I predicted Commanders 9, Bears 6. I wasn't far off. It was 12-7. It was for the second straight Thursday. We're not going to talk about this very long, but I do find one thing interesting about last night's game. And the Bears, besides those horrible Halloween uniforms they're wearing, they played like it was Halloween. They had 3 trips inside the 10 in which they didn't score, which obviously cost them the game. Both of those teams are really bad football teams. But
yeah, I ended up watching the game with Brody Miller, our colleague Luke Johnson, and our former colleague Josh Katzenstein. We had a good group out, and it was awful. It was almost as bad as the Colts Broncos game from the week before. And it's a little ominous because next Thursday it's Saints Cardinals. So I'm hoping that the game is better than what we've seen the last 2 Thursdays for Amazon.
Yeah, and like I said, I think this is the 5th Thursday. I think I've been right 4 out of 5. I'm not sure if Saints fans are going to want me to be right 5 out of 6. I haven't figured that out yet. So we'll worry about that. Again, comments or questions, very welcome. All you got to do is leave them in the stream. If you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, if you're watching on Twitter, then all you have to do is send me a note at Jim Derry Jr., and I will read that on the air as well. We have a question from Mark as well. He wants to know, do we foresee Jameis Winston being the starter against once he is fully healthy? Because the offense performs a lot better with game manager Andy Dalton at the helm. I completely disagree. But you go ahead, Dunk, and I'm sure I would guess that you disagree with me, but I don't know.
Well, that's a tough question, Mark, because I think Dalton's going to start again this week, and if he wins, if they play well and he wins, I think it's going to be hard for Dennis Allen to take him out, just because I think the locker room's going to be fully behind Dalton at that point. Not against Jameis Winston, just, hey, we got a good thing going. Let's stick with Dalton. It's going to be the biggest decision of Dennis Allen's, very young career as a head coach with the Saints. There's no question about that. I think there's a reason, though, Jameis Winston was named the starter, and the Saints are paying him to be the starter. So it's a complicated situation And I don't disagree with you that the offense has operated better the last couple of weeks, I think, with Dalton than it did earlier. But it's hard to say because Winston was hurt so much of that time. It's hard to evaluate. Was it the injury that was causing
Correct.
Winston to perform so poorly, or what was it? The only people that really know that are the Saints people being their coaches and players. They know because I think they're going to have a much better read on the situation. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what's going on in Dallas with Cooper Rush, and they're winning. They're winning big right now with him. And Dak's
I don't think Dak's in trouble.
I know, but it is a little bit of a similar situation in that you got a good thing going. You don't want to upset the apple cart with that momentum, but I do agree. Dak's being paid about 3 times more than James Winston.
Yeah,
so
right.
It's probably easier decision for Mike McCarthy.
Well, here's my thing. I mean, it's a tough situation. I understand why Saints fans want Andy Dalton because you can't, like you said, Dunk, you can't judge by what we saw from the first few games because we don't know how hurt Jameis Winston was. And there's a reason why that he didn't get yanked because of his performance. He got yanked because he's hurt. And when he's ready to come back, I don't see how you can Wally Pip him, I guess is the way to put it. It's not like Andy Dalton is some up-and-coming quarterback. I mean, I think you have to now if Jameis goes in and stinks it up and can't play, then you can make a change. But I just think the guy's the starter, and you can't just pull a guy for being hurt. I mean, so that's the way. I mean, it is a tough decision, and I agree with you that it is going to be one of the toughest decisions of Dennis Allen's early career here in New Orleans. I mean, how do we think Sean Payton would react? And I hate comparing Sean Payton to Dennis Allen. I know he hates it, but how do we think Sean Payton would react in this situation?
Well, I feel like if Sean Payton were the head coach, Jameis Winston wouldn't be the quarterback. That's just how I feel. I feel like he would have gone in another direction in the offseason. So it's hard for me to say. I don't think it's anything against Jameis Winston. I just think Sean Payton has a view of what the quarterback position is, and I think he saw enough of Jameis Winston maybe to go in another direction in the offseason. That's going to be the ultimate question. There's 2 questions that we're going to have down the road with this Jameis Winston, tenure here. One is why the Saints elected to go out and make him their starting quarterback this offseason after they failed to get Deshaun Watson. Did they not have any other plan B? And then the other one I think falls on Dennis Allen. Was he slow to pull the hook on Jameis Winston? Maybe he did it one game too late, right? I mean, that Carolina game was just awful. Should he have gone quicker to Andy Dalton? Did that cost them a game?
Jeff Duncan, Jim Derry here on this Friday morning. It's the live Dattitude every Friday morning at 9:15. Actually, we're going to be live next week on Thursday. So I say every Friday. Next Friday will be recorded, and next Thursday, Dunk will be in Glendale, Arizona, or Phoenix, wherever he's going to be. We'll be live next Thursday. We'll give you a time when we know it. Got a question from Stephen Wiley. Do we think it's going to be a high-scoring game? Now, look, we're not going to give our predictions out to the end of the show, but we can answer if we think it's going to be a high-scoring game. And my answer is no, I don't, because I think that it's going to come down to defenses. I think that Dunk, for the Saints to be successful, I think they have to get pressure on Joe Burrow. And I think that they realize that how key the defense is going to be in this game. So I don't think it'll be anything like last week's 39-32 shootout. I think it's going to be more a game in the 20s.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, I don't know what the total is, but
43.
I would lean toward the under there because a couple of reasons. One, we're looking at maybe not another game without Mike Thomas and maybe Jarvis Landry. They haven't practiced yet. Very disappointing. The Saints receiving core could be very limited in this game, which means they're going to have to lean on the running game again. And let's be very clear here. What happened last week is not going to happen this week. I mean, that was a byproduct of Seattle being one of the worst run defenses in the league. I thought they were very poorly prepared for that game. I mean, they looked like they weren't prepared for the Taysom Hill package at all, even though people have seen it on tape. That's not going to happen with Lou Amarillo. I mean, he's one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. They have a good front seven. it's going to be a lot harder to move the ball on this Cincinnati defense. And conversely, the Saints, I think, defensively match up very well with Cincinnati. Their defensive line, I think, can get after the Bengals up front. That's still a weakness. Lyle Collins, the former LSU star, has been terrible, been a bust right now as a free agent signing. I think they're going to attack him on the right tackle. And so in JD, the Saints have to get after them up front, because if Marshawn Lattimore doesn't play, you're very vulnerable on the back end. If he can't go, which it's looking pretty doubtful right now, I think the Saints are going to have to play a lot more zone on the back end. I mean, we saw last week they got burned over the top with all the new players they have in the secondary. I think they're going to have to be conservative on the back end and really rely on that front seven to put pressure on Burrow, because if he's allowed to sit back there and they have this makeshift secondary, I mean, he's going to pick them apart, especially with their receivers.
But I think what the Saints also need to do is look and see what the Ravens did last week, and they just stuffed Jamar Chase. And they weren't as successful as getting to Burrow as I think the Saints will be and need to be. But the Saints also need to be able to make sure that they can shut down Chase, because if they can, with T. Higgins being hurt and probably out again, I would think this week, you talk about Tyler Boyd. They also have their own Michael Thomas, who's their number 3 receiver. You talk about Hayden Hurst, their tight end.
Tight end, yeah.
He is a good tight end, but he's not really a deep threat. He's more of a kind of a dink and dunk kind of tight end. And so, to me, along with the pressure dunk that the Saints, and we put the stat graphic back up and we talk about it, the Saints are really going to have to get it on there. They've been okay in pass and defense, but again, with Lattimore out, somebody's going to need to be on Chase, and so that scares me. Kind of maybe a weird, I don't want to call it a freak defense because Dale Brown's not here, but I mean some sort of defense where you got a man spy and Chase, and then play a zone as well and find a way to get in on Burrow all at the same time. It's going to be a tough challenge for sure.
Yeah, and look, Cincinnati's really struggled to run the ball, even though they have a great running back in Joe Mixon and a good backup in Samaj Piran. I mean, those guys are both excellent running backs, but you see right there, they're 25th in the league, and goes back to their offensive line, the struggles they've had there. It just is not – it's been a conundrum for that whole franchise for the last 5-6 years. They've really struggled along the offensive line. So I think Burrow's going to kind of take a little bit of the Tom Brady approach, and that is I think he's going to try and get it out quick, short passing game. And I think the Saints, if they can play good red zone defense, which they have this year, I think they're in the top 5 in the league in red zone defense, or top 10 or so. This could be a game of field goals. And as someone that, we talk about betting on here on this show, that's what you want. If you're betting the under, you want field goals.
Yeah.
You don't want to give up 7 points. You want to give up 3, and you usually can, cover that under. So I think it's going to be a close game. I think the Saints kicking game could be key in this game. And it was good to see kind of Will Lutz come back. He hasn't had his, characteristically strong year. He's kind of been a little off this year. Blake Gillikin hasn't been that good for that matter as well. That's something the Saints should be a strength, that they need to kind of get back on track in games like this that could be about field position. And
the Bengals have a really good kicker as well, and Evan McPherson, who can kick it a long way. We've seen him kick a 60-yarder, and he's in the dome. So I agree. I think both kickers could have a pretty good day. It will be interesting, and I do think there will be more field goals than touchdowns in this game. Mark wants to ask. He says, "Will Cam Jordan catch Ricky Jackson's all-time Saints?" Not in this one. I don't think he's going to get 5 sacks in this game. I think he's going to catch Ricky Jackson because I don't think even if he doesn't get 5 more this season, which I think he will, but he's not going to be. I'd be surprised if Cam Jordan calls it a career after the season. I think he's got at least 1 or 2 more left in him. Yeah,
I think he's got at least 1 more year. Now, contractually, I think they're kind of, I hate to say it in this way, but they're kind of stuck with Cam Jordan. I mean, they couldn't do anything with him even if they wanted to, because I think they've kicked that can down the road, renegotiating his deal enough times to where it's backloaded. So I think he's definitely going to be around at least through next season. And he'll end up being the all-time leading sacker. There's no question about that. And I think he's had a Hall of Fame career. We were talking. I think if you look at the Saints players from like the Drew Brees, Sean Payton era, they really only have probably 3 surefire Hall of Famers, and one of them's up this year with Jari Evans. I think he'll eventually get in. Obviously, Drew Brees is going to be a no-brainer, and I think Cam Jordan certainly will earn induction. But that's about it. And obviously Mike Thomas and Alvin Kamara have had great starts to their careers, but they've leveled off a little bit in their production.
Yeah, both of those guys have a long way to go before
Right.
they're Hall of Fame kind of guys.
Right.
Kamara's probably a little closer, I would guess. If he had 3 or 4 really good years put together, I think he'd have a good chance. Mike Thomas, to me, is a long way away from the Hall of Fame.
He's really had trouble this year staying healthy. I mean, I know he's had some bad luck. I mean, this turf toe injury. There's been players. It's been kind of
if that's
an
what
issue
you want
right
to call
now.
it.
But that turf in Carolina is an issue. I mean, the 49ers had issues with it, and for him to be out this long with this turf toe after coming off of hamstring and then his ankles and foot, he's just had a rough go over the last 2 years.
Maybe he shouldn't play there when they play there next year. I don't know what's going on. Let's talk about the injuries. As a matter of fact, we're going to get to I want to do a comparison of schedules in just a minute because we've got a new graphic with the schedules. But I want to talk about the injuries. And look, there's no hiding it. The Saints are having issues. I mean, it's not quite to the level that it was at last year, but we don't know as we go into this on Friday morning if Chris Olave is going to play. He's in concussion protocol. My guess is he will. But we don't know that for sure. They're going to be super careful after all the Tua stuff. Michael Thomas looked like he was going to have a chance to play last week. Then it was said they were trying to save him for this week. I'd say it's less than 50-50 plays. He hadn't practiced yet. And you're talking about Jarvis Landry's not looking good. Deontay Hardy's not looking good. I mean, the wide receiving core just banged up to all high heck. And Marshawn Lattimore looks like he's not going to play. We kind of talked about him for a minute. But, I mean, how are these injuries going to affect this team, Dunk? And I think that also leads to, if you don't have these receivers back, I think that would also lead to leaning towards an Andy Dalton playing over Jameis Winston. Yeah,
I agree. And I think it also leans to another heavy Taysom Hill package. I mean, you got to generate offense. Dennis Allen said that, I think, to the sideline reporter on the game last week when they asked him about Taysom Hill. He said, look, we're just trying to lean on our playmakers and generate offense any way we can because they're down so many playmakers. You got to find somebody that can help you move the ball. And I think that's where Taysom Hill would come in if all these receivers, once again, can't go. And I agree with you on Olave. I know he's in concussion protocol, but people are going to be very conservative for rushing him out there. That was a very scary injury. I mean, his head slammed into the turf.
Very scary.
He looked like he was knocked out there for a brief moment. And that's a setback because he's had a great start to his rookie year. And Mike Thomas, I know he's one of these guys, JD, that, there's certain guys I've covered in my career that are like this. They want to be 100%. They're like track athletes, right? They got to be fine-tuned. He's very in tune with his body, and he wants to be 100%. I think probably because he played through that injury a couple of years ago and ended up having a setback, and it's derailed his career somewhat. So he probably learned a lesson from that and really wants to be back 100%. And those turf toe injuries sometimes take a while. I remember Mark Ingram getting one in a game, and he was out like six games, I think. So it just depends. They're finicky injuries. Sometimes they take longer to come back. And you're right. Deontay Hardy, it looks like he's going to be out, maybe for the season. I wouldn't be surprised if they promote. I think his name's Rashid from the practice squad, right, who was like an all-time return guy at Weber State. Very, very decorated return guy. They're going to have to find some people to come plug into the lineup here because of these injuries. And what's amazing is I was just looking at the Bengals depth chart right before we came on. They have hardly had any injuries. I mean, they've had a few. You mentioned T. Higgins. Looks like he's going to be out. But if you look at their lineup on both sides of the ball, they've had the same almost 11 starters on offense and defense almost every game. They've had a few guys here and there come out, but their offense has almost been intact the whole season. So it's just a weird thing going on with the Saints right now.
They just haven't been effective. And I mean, let's take a look at the schedules. And I mean, I know this is a little bit small. So those of you looking on your phone, you may have to put it sideways if you want to look at it. But I will talk about where they come from. And the Bengals losing to Pittsburgh, that looks like a really bad loss now. They started the season losing to Pittsburgh in overtime. That looks like a terrible loss. The loss at Dallas doesn't look probably as bad as it looked back in week 2 when they actually lost it. It was the first game for Cooper Rush. Then they beat the Jets in Miami, and they beat Miami when Tua got just, obliterated, and then lose to Baltimore last week. So I don't think that, I'm not sure I quite get this line as the Saints go in as underdogs. I think it should be more like even. I mean, I'm not trying to give my prediction away, but as we talk about it and look at it, I mean, the Saints 3 losses. The Carolina loss looks terrible. But the other 2 don't look all that bad. They kind of gave the Tampa Bay game away, had a chance to push Minnesota into overtime. So, I mean, you look at them, and they're kind of similar teams. I'm kind of surprised the Saints are underdogs here.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think they're very similar teams, play a lot of close games. And when you do that, you don't leave yourself much margin for error. And I think that's what bit the Bengals in that opening loss to the Steelers. I think they missed some field goals or had some kicking game issues that were uncharacteristic. But I feel like, this game is going to be a tight one. I'll be surprised either way. The Saints are just so banged up right now.
Yeah.
I find it, Mickey Loomis said something last week that I thought was really, apropos for the Saints game. He goes, we need to be the more desperate team. And I think they were in that Seahawks game. You could just see there was a little better body language, a little more energy, enthusiasm from the team. Now, will that carry over? Are they going to, we got our win, and kind of have that kind of slow start like that's been kind of haunting this team all season long? Or are they going to come out with the same energy and enthusiasm they had? Because they're going to need it in this game. Cincinnati is going to be desperate coming off that loss to Baltimore, a very hard-fought, difficult loss, right the last second. And then I think they go to Cleveland next week, or at least have Cleveland coming in, a division game. So it's going to be interesting to see which team has the most energy in this game, because they're both going to be desperate for a win.
Well, they play Atlanta at home next week, and then they're at Cleveland on a Monday night the following week. So on Halloween night, as a matter of fact, they get the 2 orange teams in there. That's kind of you think that was planned that way?
Yeah, it would be like the pumpkin bowl.
As long as they don't wear the uniforms that the Bears wore. That was awful. Those Bears uniforms were awful.
I thought the Commanders' uniforms were pretty tight.
The Commanders' uniforms are great. I like them a lot. I just thought the Bears played like they looked like Halloween. They played like Halloween. Oh, just terrible.
It's kind of weird. Just going back to that game, like Brody Miller and I were talking. He's a big Justin Fields fan, and I've yet to see him kind of emerge. I don't know, but like you can see flashes of talent, but it just hasn't materialized. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to think of Justin Fields.
I mean, people like to make fun of Jameis Winston for his accuracy, but Jameis Winston at least is like 63, 64%, I think. Justin Fields is in the 50s, and he showed last night. I mean, he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. I mean, he made a nice pass there at the end, but they shouldn't have been throwing the ball there on that 4th down play. I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about a 12-7 really bad Thursday game. But yeah, I mean, all right. A couple things here from some watchers and listeners. Again, this is the live portion of Dattitude. Obviously, if you're listening on your podcast, you can, if you're listening on demand on podcast, you can send me a note at Jim Derry, at jderry@theadvocate.com, or find me on Twitter at Jim Derry Jr. We'll be glad to read any of our shows. Monday, Thursday, and Friday is when Dattitude runs. Monday is our review show. In fact, Garland Gillen's going to come on with me this coming Monday. And then next Thursday, Dunk will be on with me on a special Thursday live edition. And then I'm not sure who's going to come on in your spot on Friday. We'll have to figure that out on Friday. All right, Shayla, rest with the bad calls. I don't know if you pay attention to any Seattle media, but I think that Tyler Lockett and some of the Seahawks were upset. The Saints got the good end of the stick last week. So, I mean, across the course, and I'll say this again and again, the Saints have certainly been hosed throughout. We know the no call and all those things. But I say this every year, Duncan. And I know that there have been some bad calls this year. But throughout the course of a 17-game season, there is zero question that they even out in the end. The NFL does not hate the New Orleans Saints. Roger Goodell doesn't give a one rat's keister about whether the Saints make the playoffs or don't make the playoffs. There's no 32 teams think that Roger Goodell hates their team.
Exactly.
And so stop doing that. I mean, stop making excuses why your team loses. I mean, sometimes there are calls that certainly affect the game, and I know that people don't want to hear this, but the Saints have got the short end of the stick. They've also got the benefit of the stick as well throughout the course of the season, and I thought Sunday they certainly got the benefit of the stick.
Yeah, every close call went to the Saints, including that one right after halftime of DK Metcalf, which, they had Dean Blandino on, the former supervisor of officials, who said it should not have been a fumble. It shouldn't have been a catch. It should have been just an incomplete pass. And, that was a huge play in the game because Seattle had taken the momentum right before halftime. That was just an awful sequence of events.
Really was.
Fumbles. They give up a long touchdown pass in the last few seconds. I don't know how that happens. And then you come out and Seattle's got the ball in first play, fumble. So, yeah, that was a game-changing play there. And I think the penalties at one time were 2-1. So it evens out. I mean, you're so right, JD. I mean, like, people think there's this conspiracy against the Saints, and it's really kind of silly. I mean, they're not up there in a room in New York conspiring against New Orleans. I can tell you, people in the NFL offices love New Orleans. They love everything about it. They love the city. I think it's the best Super Bowl host city.
There's no doubt.
It's one of the great stories, how the team came back from Katrina. They were heavily involved with getting the team back here from San Antonio when the owner was pretty much squatting in San Antonio. There were so many things that went on behind closed doors. Nobody's out to get the Saints. Nobody. And so I just think you have to move on from that. It's very high school Harry, in my opinion.
I find it funny because I know you can't see this, but the number of viewers we have at one time, people don't like when I say that stuff. They drop off. They like cut me off. They're not going to listen to me. I mean, we lost about half our viewers when I said that just now.
Yeah,
and I don't care. If you don't like it, it's the truth. I mean, so that is the truth. The NFL does not hate the Saints. Roger Goodell does not hate the Saints. I'm going to say it probably every week or at least every other week. And too bad. I mean, that's just the way that it is. All right, Steven wants to know, are they going to use Mark Ingram more in the run game? And I think that's an excellent question. I thought it was kind of weird, the game plan last week. And again, it ended up working out in the end. But Mark Ingram kind of was a no-show last week. They used him on some short yardage downs near the goal line. They used him on a 2-point conversion play. But why was Mark Ingram kind of missing last week?
Well, I think it had more to do with just they were going with a hot hand and Kamara, and then a lot of the run package would go, say, just because of the way the game played out, Taysom Hill's kind of they go to that QB power when they get into short yardage. So when they found themselves in a lot of 3rd and 1s, 2nd and 1s, and that is going to be where Taysom Hill comes in the game. He's almost unstoppable in that situation. So I think it was mainly just an anomaly of how the game played out more than a plan. But I it's funny. I was just thinking this week, JD, and I know I don't want to get too far off track on this, but where areas will the Saints look at to bolster in this offseason coming up? I know we still got a whole year to go, but I think they're definitely going to have to draft a running back next year or bring in another running back.
No question.
Nothing against Mark Ingram, but he's the oldest running back in the league. And you don't want to keep pounding Alvin Kamara. I don't think he's built to hold up. Very few guys are. So I think they're going to need a running back. I think they're going to need a safety. And I think they're going to need a defensive tackle because right now I don't see much production at all out of their interior defensive line. I think David Onyemata has really leveled off ever since he came back from that suspension last year to start the season. He's just been kind of a guy out there. I hate to say it that way, but there was a reason I think Dennis Allen in this past draft was very high on Jordan Davis, the big, massive defensive tackle from Georgia who ended up going to Philadelphia. I think he was enamored with him because he thought, man, we plug that guy in the middle with these defensive ends, will be almost impossible to run on. So I think those areas, again, are areas that the Saints are going to have to bolster down the road. And running back's definitely a spot where I think once you get past Alvin Kamara, they're pretty average. And that's why you see them still churning the roster down there. They brought in Jake Funk, one of the great names in the NFL from the Rams, and is a guy that I wouldn't be surprised by the end of the year if he's not on the field for this team.
Jim Derry, Jeff Duncan here on a Friday morning as we have about 13, 14 minutes left in the show. If you want to get your question or comment in, now's the time to do it. Again, about 13, 14 minutes left before we have to let Dunk go because he's got some things going on this morning. And, I want to ask, there's something that came to my mind. We're talking about injuries. Do we know where Trevor Penning stands? Because I think, look, James Hurst, I don't think he's a left tackle. I mean, I think he's a good lineman. And he's a solid number 2 guy, and it's a great guy to have because you can plug him in anywhere. But I think, frankly, he's been beat quite a bit. And had Trevor Penning been healthy, I think that had he not won the job, that he certainly would have been in by now. Do we know where he stands?
No, that's a good point. I need to check on him, to be honest with you. But that's a very good point. I think James Hurst, there's a reason he's a swing tackle backup guy in the league. He's a very smart guy. He knows his limitations, and the Saints are operating around him right now. He's capable, but he's not a force the way Trevor Penning would be, especially in the running game. I mean, Trevor Penning was a monster there toward the end, right before he got hurt, and that was a big injury. I mean, look at Seattle last week; they were starting 2 rookie tackles,
right? And
you could see the athletic ability. I mean, Cross held up very well against Marcus Davenport, who's a terrific rush in. And I know the Saints were high on Cross, and they obviously were very high on Trevor Penning. So that's something that we've all forgotten about a little bit is, they're missing their first-round starting left tackle. This is a guy that by now I think would have worked his way into the starting lineup. So I need to make a call on that.
Dunk, you can compare it to, I mean, if you want to think about it, where would the Saints be right now without Chris Olave? Yep. I mean, so it's kind of the same thing. If the Saints didn't have Chris Olave, they'd be in a world of hurt right now. And so that's why it's, and Penning could have the same effect on this offensive line.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to bang on a guy because he's a great guy and a great a leader and everything, but like Jarvis Landry really has not. I mean, he's not contributing. I mean, they went out and signed him, and as you start to see these guys at certain points in their careers, they start getting banged up all the time because it's a violent game. There's a reason nobody in the league was banging down Jarvis Landry's door to sign him. And, they got to get him back on the field and get him healthy. But how long will he hold up once he comes back? That's my question.
All right, the Saints are in an interesting position as we get closer to our prediction. I think we're about probably 4 or 5 minutes away. If you want to give us your prediction, we will put that on the field. And actually, Shayla makes a good point that I think we should put up. Same thing with the Honey Badger. I think Tyrann Mathieu has been, except for the pick, he's been basically a no-show on this team. I'm not sure what he does not look good at all so far. Well, hopefully that will change. He'll feel more comfortable, but Tyrann Mathieu has not done a lot. Before we get to our prediction again, now's your chance to get it in the comment section on Facebook or on YouTube. We will put it on the screen because we're going to have ours in about 5 minutes, maybe a little less. But I want to talk about, Dunk, this is the part of the schedule to me for the Saints where they have to get some wins. I don't want to go as far. Last week, I considered last week a must-win. You can't go to 1-4. The Saints have showed throughout their history when they get to 1-4, they're done. So I thought I don't want to go as far to call this one a must-win, but they're in a spot in their schedule. I mean, 2-4 is a tough hole to dig out of if that's where they were to go. But they're in a part of their schedule where they have to take advantage. They have, Cincinnati at Arizona. But Vegas and Baltimore both at home. They're in a 4 out of 5 game stretch at home. And if you want to go further than that, 5 out of 7 game stretch at home before they spend a lot of time in the latter part of the season on the road. They have got to win some games here. And this is as close to a must-win without it being a must-win. I'm not going to go that far.
Well, I think, the fact that they play a lot of these games at home is critical. It just goes to show you, right, that when you look at the schedule to start the season, it never plays out the way you think because this looked like an impossible stretch. And a lot of teams that made the playoffs last year, and almost all of them are struggling this year. Almost every one of them, in this next stretch of 6 games. And I think if they could go 4-2 in that stretch and kind of what would they be? That would get them to 6-5.
Yeah.
That would be a good spot to be heading into San Francisco. San Francisco game looks very difficult right now.
It does.
That's the kind of team I think is going to be difficult for the Saints. So you want to be at least above 500, I think, before you go out to San Francisco. To get there, they got to go 4-2.
But I think and we talked about this before, in this division, which I don't think is very good. I don't think Tampa is very good. I think 9 wins might be enough to win this division, assuming that you can go to Tampa and win. Because if you have any chance to win 9 games and win the division, you're going to have to beat Tampa because you're going to have to find a way to beat them in tiebreakers. Ryan Shano, my friend Ryan, thank you, John. John Keenan enjoyed the show. My friend Ryan Shano has a question. Has the secondary been disappointing? I mean, there's only one way to answer it. I mean, I think yes, right? I mean, they haven't played very well.
No, 100% agree. I mean, they got strafed. Now, I will say this. I thought last week was going to be a reality check for Geno Smith, and I was completely wrong. That guy played great. He's legit. I mean, they're going to score points on people this year with that offense, the way he's playing right now. These young tackles are playing well. Now, they lost Rashad Penny. I think that was a big blow.
Yeah, huge.
The young running back came in and had a 69-yard run.
Kenneth Walker from TCU, yeah.
Sure, very, very good player. I think they're going to score points on people all year long, but you can't give up in situations like that. I think part of that was attributable to the injuries on the back end. But, again, they got to get Marcus May back in the lineup. I mean, I think that's affected Tyrann Mathieu. You're right. He has not shined like we thought he would, but a part of that, I think, is they've had to mix and match the other safety. And I think losing P.J. Williams has been a little overlooked. I mean, he's a veteran guy. He knows this system. He's not real flashy, but I think he's a guy you can rely on. And without him and May, they ended up on one play with Daniel Sorensen and J.T. Gray on the field at safety. That's not ideal.
I completely agree. Mark has got some. Mark, I don't know why you're hating on the NFL. Tampa won 10 on the. There's no Las Vegas bias. I mean, I know that betting has become, and I'm not just saying this in the sports betting right. So obviously, I'm biased when I say this, but I have not seen any instance, or someone's gonna have to show me proof that the coming up of sports gambling, because it's been done for a long, long time, by the way. It's just now become legal, and it's legal in like 22 states. I mean, if people think that people weren't gambling big money on the NFL before that it started to become more legal, then they're crazy. But I have not seen anything that has changed anything. And Tampa, I mean, sure, we could talk about that roughing the passer call, which was awful, by the way. And hopefully a call like that will lead to some changes. And I think actually it might. That call, along with the call on Derek Carr, the one where Derek Carr was laid on, that was just insanely bad. So there have been a couple of bad roughing the pass calls, but we always want to harp on the Tom Brady ones. Those are easier calls to see because they get shown all over ESPN. There are other ones as well. All right, let's get to the prediction segment of this show, because I want to spend 3 or 4 minutes talking about the Saturday, and I wish that we could spend more time, but Dunk's got some things to do, and I definitely want to talk about predictions. Again, your last chance to get in your prediction here on the Dattitude podcast on this Friday morning. Steven says Saints 24, Bengals 21. I'm going to let you go first, Dunk, and give your prediction. Usually I read your prediction before we come on the show, but I did not this week, so I have no idea what you're going to say.
Well, I usually pick the Saints, but I'm going to pick the Bengals to win this game. I just feel like the Saints are too banged up at too many critical positions. I think Cincinnati is going to be a desperate team coming in. I think they've somewhat underperformed, and they need this game. It's an unfamiliar opponent in a lot of ways. They don't play each other very often. And I just feel like in the spot in the schedule, this favors Cincinnati. So I'm going to pick them in a low-scoring game, like maybe 19-17. Could come down to a McPherson field goal at the end. I feel like it's going to be a big kicking game.
19-17 was the score that the Bengals lost by last week. So that would be interesting if that's what it happens.
Maybe it was ingrained in my head.
Maybe so. I wanted to pick. I don't say wanted is not the right word. I don't want to sound too homery. I have picked the Saints to win every week this season so far. I picked them not to cover against Atlanta. I was right about that. And you and I have been both on the Saints bandwagon throughout the season, and the Saints are 2-3. So that shows you my record picking straight up when it comes to the Saints. I've been pretty good elsewhere. So I went in looking for reasons to pick against the Saints this week, and I can. I think the Saints are going to win this game. I think they're going to find a way to get to Joe Burrow. I think the key number, and I've said this a couple times, I think the key number is 4. If they sack Joe Burrow 4 times, and I think they will, I think the Saints win this game. I think Cam Jordan's he's been playing better and better every game. I don't know if he needs, if because he's older, he needs more time to get into the season. But he has been outstanding, and I think Davenport has done a pretty good job as well. So I think it comes down to finding a way to spy Jamar Chase, limit Joe Mixon, which everyone's been able to limit Joe Mixon so far, and get on Joe Burrow. And so my analysis tells me that the Saints are going to win this game. I don't think it's going to be by a lot. I agree with you, Dunk, that I think it's going to be a field goal game. I don't remember the exact score that I posted in my NFL column this week, my picks column. I think it's going to be something like Saints. I think it's going to go under. I think it's going to be like 22 to 17 or 22 to 18 or somewhere along those. I think the Saints win between 3 and 5. I think they cover, obviously, because they're underdogs. And I think it's going to be a tight game, but I agree with you. I think it's going to come down to the very end for sure.
Well, they've struggled this year to take away the top threat on the other team. Now, they did a good job against Kyle Pitts, but Patterson had a huge game in the opener. Christian McCaffrey ended up with over 100 yards against them. I thought Metcalf, they did a decent job, but he still hit him for a 50-yard touchdown.
Right.
Lockett had 2 big touchdowns. I mean, they've struggled to take away. Justin Jefferson lit them up. So they've struggled to take away that guy. I'll be shocked if they're able to shut down Jamar Chase, especially if Marshawn Lattimore isn't out there, because Debo has not had the impact. I think coming off that injury, he's been slow to kind of get into condition. And I think it's shown in these games. And if they don't have Lattimore out there, I think it's going to be tough.
I don't think you need to shut him down, but I think you need to if he goes for more than 120, you're in trouble. I think you can get 80 to 100 and you're okay, because, I mean, he's going to do that. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL. Burrow's going to find a way to get it to him here and there. But you got to frustrate him, and that's what the Ravens were really able – Ravens' defense isn't very good this year. When you think of Ravens, you think of defense, but they're not that same Ravens team. And they've got injuries of their own. I mean, Marcus Williams is hurt too. And so, but they frustrated, and they do it. Harbaugh is excellent at this. They pound and pound and pound and pound. And, you know, that's what you got to do this time as well. All right, before we go off the show, I want to touch on LSU and Florida and get your thoughts. I think Tulane's going to have a great weekend. They're 12-point favorites over South Florida. Great season for the Green Wave. We need to talk more about the Green Wave, and we will going forward. We're also – Pelicans are about to start their regular season. It's going to be – there will be more Pelicans talk on this show going forward. But right now, obviously, we're focused on the Saints. But I do want to touch on it. LSU, Florida. I've already made my predictions on a couple of shows. I think that LSU is better than Florida. I think Florida is just a little bit overrated because their name is Florida. But I think LSU's defense has been very good in situations like this. I think they bounce back from the Tennessee loss, and I think they play very well in the Swamp, and they win.
Yeah, I don't know. This is a tough game for me. I don't have a good feel for it at all. I think they're two very similar teams. I do think LSU feels motivated after last week. They really kind of were out of that game from the very beginning. In the opening kickoff, they never were in that game, and it really kind of changed the way the game was played because they got in such a quick hole. Tennessee dictated terms. I agree that I think defensively they can really limit Florida. They've done that in the past. I've not been that impressed with Anthony Richardson. So I think that could be a low-scoring defensive kind of classic SEC game. But, man, winning down there at the Swamp it's always tough. And I don't know if they can pull this off or not. I'll be impressed if they do. And I think that they're going to be extremely motivated. If they get into the fourth quarter in a tight game, certainly they've got a great shot.
And Billy Napier has done a great job at Florida. I think he's in a very similar position to Brian Kelly at LSU. I think both of those teams in the next couple of years are going to be powers. When they get their own recruits in there, I love Billy Napier. I think he's outstanding. But I think the same of Brian Kelly. And I know people weren't happy with the way he coached the game last week, but Brian Kelly took chances last week that he thought he had to take to have any chance to beat a Tennessee team that he knew he was outmanned against. So he did some things on fourth down, taking chances that he probably wouldn't do in almost any other game except maybe Tennessee and Alabama, knowing he's outmanned. And so you got to take chances. They didn't work, and you look silly when they don't work out. So you can say whatever you want about the chances he took, but when you play those kinds of teams, and he's going to have to do it again against Nick Saban in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I came away less critical of LSU and more impressed with Tennessee. Like that game to me,
I've been saying that for weeks.
Tennessee, I thought LSU would at least be very competitive in that game, and I didn't expect Tennessee's defense to be as good as it was. I've watched them play a few times, but I came away thinking they're going to give Alabama everything in this game. It's going to be a huge game in Neyland Stadium. And when's the last time Tennessee had a game of this caliber?
A long time.
Yeah, that place is going to be off the hook. That's going to be a great game to watch. But the one thing we were talking about last night, JD, I think you would agree with this. Alabama always has a game like once a year where you look at the line. It's a big game. It looks like they're laying a ton of points or whatever. It shouldn't be that much. And they just pound somebody. And I got a feeling like this might be that game. It's just it always seems to happen that way.
I agree wholeheartedly. I've took Alabama, and I think they're going to win big. But that doesn't take anything. I think Tennessee, and I've been saying this for a couple of weeks as well, when we get to the end of the season, I think Tennessee is going to be the best team in college football that doesn't make the playoff. I think there's a really good chance that is the case. And I can tell you, whoever they play in a bowl game, it's obviously going to be one of the big January bowl games. They're going to win. They're a really good football team. They're deservedly in the top 10. I think what are they, number 8 or number 7, somewhere along there, and they deserve that ranking. I think they'll be higher when the season's said and done. But
I think
they're just not as good as Alabama or Georgia.
Don't you think they're clearly the third best team in the SEC?
I think it's unquestionably the third best team in the NFL in the SEC, and I think they're, like I said, when all is said and done, they'll have 2 losses and they'll beat Alabama and Georgia. And other than that, who knows? Maybe they can upset one of them because Georgia hasn't played that well, to be honest. Maybe they'll upset Georgia. We'll find out. All right, Dunk, that is just going to wrap it up. You got any final thoughts as we go into Sunday? I will see you in the Dome on Sunday afternoon.
No, I'm glad you mentioned Tulane, though, because I wrote about their defense this week. I think that's the difference in their team this year. They are really good on defense. It allows them to hang in games that they wouldn't have in the past. And that's really why I think they got a shot. If they beat South Florida, which they should, I think it's a little dangerous game. I don't know if they're going to cover that point spread. It's a lot of points on the road. Yeah. But if they win that game, they got a real shot to be ranked in the top 25 for the first time in a long time. And that would be a real great feather in the cap for Willie Fritz in that program.
It would be. I'm going to be at Yeoman Stadium tonight, as a matter of fact, doing Jesuit and Carr for Varsity Sports Now. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun. It is. And Carr has been just on fire. So we'll see if that happens again tonight. Stephen Wiley says, roll Green Wave and why not? I mean, look, we want all of our teams to do well. It's more fun for us when they do. And we hope to be talking more about Tulane going forward on the show. We'll try to do our segments a little bit different. But I know most of you want to hear about the Saints, and that's what we talked about today. A very interesting one coming up in the Dome, Dunk, and I will see you there. Looking forward to it. It's been another great show. Yeah, one last thing. Okay. My column tomorrow, a little shameless plug. You'll remember this guy, Stanley Morgan, completely overlooked. 100%. St. Augustine. St. Aug kid has transformed himself from a receiver to like a special teams ace. He's their best special teams player. Everybody's talking about Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and rightfully so. Don't forget about Stanley Morgan. He's coming home. He's going to have a big group of people at the game. It's a cool story. Stanley Morgan played with Leonard Fournette at St. Augustine High School his senior year 2013. I remember it well. It was my first year back in prep after a stint in news. And all the time watching Leonard Fournette, I'm like, man, this Morgan kid's pretty good. Why don't they talk about him a little bit more? Get this, JD. He's a leading receiver in the history of Nebraska. That's amazing. That is crazy. Yeah. And the Huskers are playing well right now since they brought on Mickey Joseph, Archbishop High School. I'm just saying. So good point. We'll see more of that. All right. And you will hear more from Duncan and I next Thursday. Dattitude runs every Monday, Thursday, and Friday. Next week's live show is going to be on Thursday to preview the Saints and Cardinals on Thursday Night Football. and you will hear me on Monday. We'll be reviewing the Saints-Bengals game, and I'll be doing it with Garland Gillen. Make sure you join us then. Until then, we will talk to you later, and have a great weekend. Enjoy the game, everybody.